we were talking about usury, and we advanced the essential distinction that usury is the taking of interest on a non-productive loan. We said that taking interest on a productive loan, charging for the use of capital, you're taking a stake in something that is real, that is produced, that is generated, that exists. The problem with usury is that you're taking a share in something that doesn't exist. Let's say I had an apple orchard and you're my lender, and you demanded, let's say, 100 bushels of apples annually. And I borrowed money from you. And then some natural disaster blighted the whole orchard and it was completely unproductive. Before I could pay you when it was productive, because it made more than 100 bushels of apples. But now it yields zip. But you as the lender insist, oh, that was the deal. 100 bushels of apples. The fact that your orchard has been blighted is not my problem. So I'm going to have to go out and try and find those apples from some other orchards in order to pay my debt. And I get deeper and deeper and deeper into trouble and debt. That's immoral. Don't you think?
Absolutely.
There has to be a sensitivity and there has to be a willingness to know what's the money used for. This is proper lending practice. What is the money intended to be used for? And even when you know what the intention is and you've crunched the numbers in the business plan and it looks feasible, it doesn't mean that it will always be productive. And if it ceases to be productive at some point on its trajectory, then one needs to reconsider the loan and its terms. So this is the second point that I'm trying to make. The first one was between productive and unproductive loans. The second point is that there is something about, it is of the very nature of usury that it tries to get something out of nothing. And if this desire isn't checked to get something out of nothing, it ruins people's lives and eventually ruins and drains the whole economy.
That's right.
Does that make sense?
It does. Totally makes sense. I've experienced it myself. I know. Of course it makes sense. I think everyone's had an experience with that. Well, most people have had an experience with it.
When life was simpler, I think it was easy to identify.
Yeah.
I mean, you can still identify it in your life experience, but when life was simpler, it was easier to identify when this kind of arrangement was about to be foisted upon you, or where you could walk into such a trap. But today, it's very difficult to identify because, as I say, we're all enmeshed in an economy and a banking system which camouflages transactions. You put your money on deposit in a bank. You don't know to whom that money will be lent. You don't know what questions are going to be asked. Sometimes that money could be lent for productive purposes. But sometimes it won't be lent for productive purposes. It may just be lent because somebody's in personal debt, or they got medical bills to pay or something, and it's a different situation. And you could be party to the usury by having your money in the bank. And this is a problem. And as I say, throughout human history, society has looked askance at it. And in the Middle Ages, the church said, oh, you can't practice usury. But people who were outcasts to the society would practice it. And even kings would go and get loans. So the Christian wasn't allowed to practice it. So the ghettoized Jews were left with the task of money lending. Now, you can't just blame the moneylender, especially when the authorities are going to turn a blind eye to usury, and especially when the authorities themselves may want to benefit down the track for their wars and so on. Usury has an appeal. The borrower themselves, all right, may be in a more vulnerable situation than the lender. There may be a power imbalance. It's important to recognise that. So the lender actually has greater responsibility to find out what that money is being used for, and to protect themselves, their own capital, because you can't get something out of nothing. You can't get blood out of a stone.
No, you can't.
But also to protect the borrower from self-harm. This is being responsible for each other. The borrower needs to reflect, and maybe the responsible moneylender that does want to see a return on their money should say, listen, what you need is to go to a wealthier relative or friend who can lend you this money at no interest, and then you can pay them back, or maybe they can make a gift of it, or you can pay them back down the track without interest.
Very old-fashioned notion. Doesn't happen these days.
Unfortunately, people have become a lot more self-interested.
Guarded.
Me first, and maybe there are a lot of charitable people, but there is a role of charity, and when you're doing charity, you should be doing charity. You should not be trying to profit off somebody else's misery, despair, misfortune, necessitousness. Would you lend money to a gambler?
No.
And demand a return?
No, you wouldn't get a return.
Well, firstly, it's silly because you're not likely to get a return. But a gambler thinks that they're going to make it big. But you're landing yourself as the lender, again, in a situation where you're trying to get something for nothing. And it's not morally right. You want all the security, and you want them to take all the risk. In the global economic crisis, there was a tsunami of subprime mortgages. Money was being lent to buy a house, and the person didn't have the wherewithal to service the loan. And furthermore, the mania got so great that multiple mortgages were being held by individuals of no great means whatsoever. Even their dog could get a mortgage made out to it.
Crazy.
And so that liability, the joy of having lent all of that, then gets packaged up as derivatives, collateral debt obligations, all these weird exotic financial instruments, and then gets on sold from institution to institution. There's nothing more secure than housing, right? Bricks and mortar. How would you like this juicy investment? And it was all right for a while because the market kept going up and up and up and up. The housing market, that is. So if you bought a house for 100,000 today, before long it was 200,000. So you were guaranteed to be able to find a buyer and to turn a capital gain. So the market got inflated and overheated. And that's called a bubble.
A bubble?
A bubble. The Dutch found that happened in the 1600s with their tulips. There was a tulip bubble. It can happen with stocks. In fact, it did happen with tech stocks around the turn of the century. And it happened in housing, especially in America. 2007, the bubble was about to burst. And it did bust. And the market had to find its own level. There's a lot of speculation about why booms and busts. Must it be? It would seem that there is something about our economic system which leads to booms and busts. I also mentioned before that not only are there massive amounts of personal debt, which we get into with our credit cards, for example, where we try to live beyond our means. So again, get the subtlety of trying to get something out of nothing. If you live beyond your means, you want something, but you haven't produced an equivalent amount of value to match up with what you want to consume. So you get into credit card debt.
I don't like credit cards personally.
Well, they can be a real danger, especially if people are
I know they can come in handy
addicted
if
to
you're
that.
travelling and whatnot.
Oh, they can be handy, yes, but they have to be managed really well. If you're going to have a credit card, you need to pay off the debt before all that interest kicks in, because what happens when the interest kicks in? You are in
Snowballs.
It does snowball, but you're actually in a usury trap.
Yeah.
I don't know if people normally think about it
buried in
like that. But that's exactly what usury is, because you've put, I can't make ends meet this week. I'll pay my electricity bill with my credit card. I'm a bit tight for cash at the Woolies counter. I'll pay my grocery bill with the credit card. I'll go on this outing with the credit card. Now, this is not a productive enterprise. But the bank has promoted this credit card and advertised it. It wants to lend you money, and it's going to be maybe it's charging you 20% on your credit card. How can you afford to pay 20% interest if you're spending on consumables? This is not an investment in a productive operation. So it's all interrelated. What happens in a person's desires and they become disordered and they want to live beyond their means, they want their consumption to outstrip their production. But then they get caught in a usury trap where they're being charged interest for consumption, which interest can only legitimately be charged for production. Do you see the connections?
Yep.
We all want something for nothing. And the advertising agents and the marketers and the whole system that we call capitalism, but it isn't really capitalism, that dominates the advanced economies. It's a system that's based on usury. Capital just means, capital's a neutral word, it's like money. You need capital to begin any operation. A farmer needs seed capital. He needs seed to sow, to raise a harvest. That seed from previous farming that he keeps, he's got to preserve it dry. It has to be able to be grown, able to be sown. That's part of his capital. But so is the farmhouse that he lives in, and all the tools that he's got to plough the fields with and do all the work around the farm with. That's part of his capital. And the clothes on his back. He can't just farm naked.
No, he can't.
And the food stores in the larder. All of these things have to keep the farmer going. And thank God for capital. And businesses starting out need capital too. Even micro businesses can get loans these days. And it's a good thing, provided those loans aren't usurious. It's not uncommon to need a leg up, unless there is some previously saved store of wealth that can be applied to the generation of future wealth, that can be put to productive purposes, whether that's going to come from your family or whether it's going to come from your own savings. All of that is capital. Now, are you telling me that the economic system we have today is just based on capital? No, it's not. Is it just based on private property? No, it's not. It's based on something else. There is land, there is labour, there is capital, and all of these ingredients are needed for the generation of wealth. And it is reasonable for land to demand its rent, for labour to demand a just wage. It's got to be more than subsistence, more than what's needed to survive. If wages are staying down here and inflation is rising and rising and rising, there's an injustice in that, which the peacemaker needs to be cognizant of. Because remember, I said that there can't be authentic peace where there is injustice.
And there can't be.
There is injustice today, where there's indiscriminate taking of human life on a vast scale. And there's also injustice in the indiscriminate confiscation of human wealth on a large scale. If you deny a worker the return on their labour, you've stolen from them. You might as well just pull the food out of their mouth and out of their children's mouths. It used to be possible in my parents' time for one income, the breadwinner's income, to be able to pay for a mortgage and feed a family and raise a family. things have changed. And as we said in a previous podcast, now you could have two people out there earning, and they still don't feel confident enough, secure enough to be able to start a family. So whatever changes we acquiesce in the economy create lifestyle changes, and those lifestyle changes will send people out into the same patterns of work and so on to make more of the same. So it can be a vicious circle. We really have to think deeply about economic reform and monetary reform. You deny a just wage, you're stealing. If wages are stagnant but prices are rising through inflation, that's theft. Not to mention taxation. Some forms of taxation are legitimate, but not all forms. Why is inflation necessary? Why is the world racked with inflation? The scourge of inflation is the result of this debt problem. Because when people can't pay their debts individually, by the household, or nationally, the way to deal with it is to inflate the debt away by printing more money. And this happens because we have a fiat currency, live in a fiat economy. So when you put more money into circulation, there's a greater amount of money chasing the same number of goods and services. That means that the price of each of these goods and services is going to go up and up and up.
Oh dear.
Because more money is chasing the same amount of goods. So inflation is going to kill off savings as well. So if anybody is saving in a savings account, inflation is going to eat away at their savings, of course. But if there are massive debts, and the debt is held at, let's say, 5 billion or whatever, and the currency inflates, then that 5 billion is not really worth what it was before the inflation of the currency takes place. So it's a way of minimizing the debt. And the whole business revolves around getting something for nothing, getting something out of nothing. It really has to do with the ontology of money and wealth. There has to be something real and present. There's no use thinking that nothing is offering you something. We talked about how the banking system brings money out of nothing, like a magician. The central bank can print money, lend it to the banks in the system, but then the banks in the system have a power called fractional reserve banking that can multiply this effect. And that is, for every dollar of depositors' funds that they hold, they can lend out $10, maybe $20. Are they lending out something they have? No, they're not. They're lending out something they haven't. And the moment you sign up to that loan, money is being created as debt. It is debt that's being pushed out of the money system. It's money that doesn't exist, but if you fail to pay back the loan, you can be sure that they'll come for your real assets because the loan has been secured. There's some collateral. Maybe it's some personal possessions. Maybe it's your house. So when you default on the loan, and there's certainly going to be a vast amount of defaulting because with compound interest and with loans being taken for unproductive purposes and nobody asking what's this loan for or nobody really caring, and there's one fixed rule, X% interest, doesn't matter what the money is for, there's going to be a lot of defaulting. So you've been given fictitious money the interest is real because you're going to have to pay that back out of real wealth that you have. And when you fail to do that, your assets get liquefied.
I wonder why people are stressed to the max.
It's an enormous source of stress for people.
Unbelievable.
But it also explains, doesn't it, why over time we've seen the rich get richer and the poor get poorer.
Oh, of course.
And the middle class has been gutted.
Oh, forget the middle class, it's horrible.
The middle is hollowing out. So you're getting extremes of poverty and extremes of wealth. And it's the credited class that is getting very wealthy.
That's right. You're totally right there.
So the four major divisions of economy: production, exchange, distribution, and consumption. The distribution part is where injustice can occur. It's the place where injustice most frequently occurs, I think. But our schemes of redistribution have largely failed because there are problems here. I think some wit once said that if you gathered up all the wealth in the world and then distributed it in equal parcels to every person on the globe, everybody got the same starting amount. Before too long, it would end up in the same pockets that it was in before.
And is that because of the way people think?
Yes. Some people have a mentality that leads to being owners, and some people have the mentality that leads to being dispossessed. And it's almost like to those who acquire, more is given to them, and to those who lose, that losing just becomes a spiraling down. So there's a kind of truth to this adage.
That's horrible.
Yes. So again, what are we going to do to stop the economy spinning off the centrifuge and tearing apart between the rich and the poor? Wise laws certainly can disincentivize the massive monopolistic accumulation of capital. And wise laws can also incentivize people protecting and keeping what they've got and defending small holdings of property. Because the tax base, and this is where, taxation can come into it as well. If you want a society where you want massive accumulations in the hands of a very few, and in every industry we see this, the Amazons of every industry, and over time, you go from a triopoly to a duopoly to a monopoly, But if you wind the clock back some decades, you'll realise there were lots of small businesses. Now we have Woolies and Coles, and maybe Aldi. But before there were lots of mum and pop shops on the corners, grocery stores.
I like that.
Yes, and we can remember, if we're old enough, going down to the local grocery store. And
Or the local delicatessen.
Or the local
that
delicatessen.
supported a family.
yes, so we had
Yeah.
all of the sorts of things you'd find in the supermarket, unbundled and in separate stores.
Much better quality, in
Yeah.
fact.
Yeah, there's a quality issue as well.
Mm.
And it also applies in manufacturing when people took pride in crafting and making particular lines of
I
things.
didn't have preservatives and genetically modified crap that they're trying to push onto people. It was a different time.
It was a different time, and it was a time where people could run small businesses. Now you say,
support their families.
well, yes, and they were able to support their families, but you can object and say, well, isn't it more efficient just to have it large scale and bring the price down for everybody?
Bring the price down, Thomas? Come on.
But what's happened for?
I don't think that's happening.
Well, if you and I are the only two competitors in the field, you're Coles and I'm Woolies.
You got a lot of buying power. Yeah.
We can set the price. We can do
They try and rip people off too.
Yeah.
So it's an unfair system.
Yeah, and it's the same with the big oil companies. They can collude and they can basically set the price. It's not a real competition, and it's gotten completely out of hand. But where are those?
It's like, how much is enough for these people?
Well, remember, we're all in this together. I think the rich have their own problems, just as the poor have their problems.
Of course, there are other areas of life you need to manage, and like health.
Yeah, and I'm not here. It's not about just creating divisions in society. We want to see, not all employers are exploitative.
But some are.
Some bosses are, some aren't. Some want the enterprise that they run to be for the common good. And some incentivize this by having shareholder schemes. Like, if you're working in the business, then you have a share or a stake in the business. So you're really working for yourself. There is something about working for yourself, working on your own business, which is a value and a virtue that's going the way of the dodo. Or what about those family members that ran the grocery store on the corner? Where are they today? Maybe they're working for Coles and Woolies.
I think a lot of
maybe
them,
they're
if you
store
retired,
managers.
They would have made enough money during that period to retire. But Richard Branson had that sort of attitude, like what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
He brought up a lot of people with him. Whenever his company did well, a lot of people benefited from it. But not too many people think like that.
Yeah, there's needs to be this consciousness of creating a commonwealth. The people who are helping you to run your operation, it's good for them to have a stake in the running of that operation as well.
He's even helped people who've been unemployed find their vocation and excel. But not too many people have that attitude, unfortunately.
So whether it's inflation or massive taxation, and one of the the causes of taxation is that governments have debts to pay.
Mm.
Debts to whom? Well, to the banks. And can you imagine the billions, the trillions of dollars of debt for some national economies? So much of this is usury. That's where we began, with usury. So much cannot be paid. And eventually there's going to have to be, somebody's going to have to take a haircut. And it's not going to be me. What I mean is, people default on a loan after a certain point. Whole countries default on loans after a certain point. We've seen that in recent history as well. Otherwise, there'll be massive economic derangements, hyperinflation and all sorts of things, and revolution. Unfortunately, we'll have to leave off here, but I think that if we understand where it all came from, I think it comes from confusing something with nothing and trying to get blood out of a stone, trying to get wealth out of something that's not there, trying to make a claim on wealth that doesn't exist. I'll speak to you next time.